My husband mocked our marriage at a fancy dinner. I walked away and built a life. He'll forever envy. They say you never truly know someone until they humiliate you in front of the people who matter most. I learned that lesson over a $200 bottle of wine and my husband's cruel laughter. I'm Emma, 32 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. You know that feeling when you wake up one morning and realize your entire life has been a carefully constructed lie? That's where my story begins. But let me back up, because the unraveling didn't happen overnight. It happened over appetizers at the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, and it changed absolutely everything. The night that destroyed my marriage started with a text message. Wear something impressive. Dinner with the partners at 8. I should have known something was off. My husband Marcus never asked me to dress up for his work dinners anymore. In fact, over our 7 years of marriage, I'd slowly been phased out of his professional life entirely. But that night, he wanted me there. And like the dutiful wife I'd been trained to be, I complied. I spent 3 hours getting ready. My long blonde hair fell in perfect waves down my back. I wore an emerald silk dress that hugged every curve, the one Marcus bought me for our 5th anniversary, and then never complimented me on. I looked beautiful. I knew I did. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked like she belonged in that world of luxury and success. What I didn't know was that I was dressing up for my own public execution. Part 1. The Golden Cage. Let me paint you a picture of my life before everything fell apart. From the outside, I was living the American dream. We had a stunning brownstone in Brooklyn, the kind with original crown molding and a garden that made our neighbors green with envy. Marcus was a rising star at one of the city's most prestigious law firms, pulling in a salary that made my small-town parents' heads spin. And me? I was the trophy wife. God, I hate that term, but that's exactly what I'd become. It wasn't always like that. When Marcus and I met at Columbia, I was getting my master's in art history. He was in his 2nd year of law school. We were equals. We stayed up until 3 in the morning debating philosophy, politics, art. He loved my mind. Or at least, he said he did. You're going to do incredible things, Emma, he used to whisper to me. You're going to change the world. I believed him. I believed in us. I believed in the future we were building together. But somewhere between the wedding and our 7th anniversary, I disappeared. Not literally, of course. I was still there, still in that beautiful brownstone, still sleeping next to him every night. But the woman I was, the woman with dreams of curating exhibitions at the Met, of writing the definitive biography of Artemisia Gentileschi, she vanished. It happened slowly. First, it was, just take a year off after graduation to settle into married life. Then it was, the commute to that gallery job would be brutal, and I'm working such long hours. Someone needs to manage the house. Then it was, why don't you wait until we have kids to start a serious career? We never had kids. Not because we didn't want them, at least I wanted them, but because Marcus always had a reason to wait. Next year, after the next promotion, when things settled down. I filled my days with yoga classes and charity luncheons with other lawyers' wives. I perfected recipes from the New York Times cooking section. I redecorated our home 3 times. I volunteered at the local library's literacy program, the only thing that made me feel like I was using my education for something meaningful, and I told myself I was happy. I told myself this was enough. I told myself that supporting Marcus's career was noble, that being a homemaker was a valid choice, that I could always pursue my dreams later. The lies we tell ourselves are the most dangerous ones. By the time that fateful dinner rolled around, I'd become a shadow. I could see it in the way Marcus's colleagues' eyes would glaze over when I tried to contribute to conversations. I could feel it in the way Marcus would interrupt me mid-sentence to redirect the discussion to something more relevant. I could sense it in how my own voice had become smaller, softer, more apologetic. Sorry, I just thought, I don't mean to interrupt, but maybe I'm wrong, but when did I start talking like that? The Emma from Colombia never apologized for her opinions. She never second-guessed herself. She never made herself small to fit into someone else's vision of who she should be. But that Emma was gone, or so I thought. Part 2. The Dinner Cipriani's. Of course it was Cipriani's. Marcus always chose Cipriani's for important dinners. The restaurant screamed old money and new success, exactly the image he wanted to project. I arrived 15 minutes early as instructed. Marcus was already there, holding court at a large round table with 5 other people. I recognized Richard Blackwell immediately, senior partner, the man who held Marcus's career trajectory in his perfectly manicured hands. Next to him sat his wife, Diane, dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than most people's cars. The others were partners too, though I'd only met them briefly at the firm's annual gala. James and Patricia Chen, power couple in matching Rolex watches, and David Morrison, the firm's closer, accompanied by a woman who was definitely not his wife of 20 years. Ah, there she is! Marcus stood, gesturing to me with his wineglass. Something about his smile made my stomach clench. It wasn't warm. It was performative. Gentlemen, ladies, this is Emma, my better half. The way he said it, like he was introducing a particularly well-trained pet, should have been my first warning. I slid into the seat next to Marcus, accepting a kiss on my cheek that felt more like a brand than a greeting. Diane gave me a sympathetic smile, the kind women give each other when they recognize their own reflection in someone else's gilded cage. The evening started normally enough. Appetizers were ordered: tuna tartare, burrata, carpaccio. Wine flowed freely. The conversation revolved around the firm, a major case they'd just won, the new corner offices being assigned. I stayed quiet, playing my role. Smile, nod, look interested, don't interrupt. So Emma, Richard said, turning to me during a lull in the conversation. What keeps you busy these days? Marcus is always going on about how he couldn't manage without you. I perked up, grateful to be included. Well, I've been volunteering at the Brooklyn Public Library, helping adults improve their reading skills. It's incredibly rewarding. Just last week, one of my students read her first complete novel. That's nice, Marcus cut in, his tone dripping with condescension. Emma's always finding little projects to keep herself occupied. Little projects. My volunteer work, the thing that gave me purpose, reduced to a little project. I felt heat rising to my cheeks, but I swallowed my irritation. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass him in front of his colleagues. It sounds meaningful, Patricia offered kindly, but the moment had passed. The conversation moved on to vacation homes in the Hamptons. I sipped my wine and retreated back into my silence. This was normal. This was my life. I could endure one more dinner. Then came the main course, and with it, the massacre of my dignity. I don't even remember what triggered it. Someone asked about our anniversary, maybe, or how we met. The details are fuzzy, blurred by what came next, but suddenly, Marcus was telling a story. You know what's funny about marriage? He said, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who'd had just enough wine to lose his filter, but not enough to lose his eloquence. Everyone tells you it's about partnership, equality, all that modern bullshit. But really, it's about knowing your role. He laughed. The others laughed uncertainly, not sure if this was going somewhere funny or somewhere uncomfortable. Take Emma and me, for example. When we met, she had all these big dreams. She was going to be a famous art curator, write groundbreaking books, change how people think about women in Renaissance art. He said it mockingly, like my dreams had been childish fantasies. And I thought, sure, why not? Let her have her little ambitions. My heart started pounding. Where was he going with this? But then we got married and reality set in. Someone had to be the breadwinner. Someone had to be the support system. And let's be honest. He gestured to me with his fork, a piece of steak speared on the end. She wasn't going to make any real money with an art history degree, so she graciously agreed to focus on the home front. Graciously agreed, as if I'd had a choice. As if he hadn't systematically dismantled every opportunity I tried to pursue. Marcus. I started, my voice barely a whisper. He kept going, gaining momentum, playing to his audience. And you know what? It works. She keeps the house running, I bring home the bacon. Traditional, maybe, but effective. I mean, let's face it, not everyone is cut out for high-pressure careers. Some people are better suited for domestic life. The table had gone silent. Even David Morrison, who'd brought his mistress to a work dinner, looked uncomfortable. My point is, Marcus continued, oblivious or simply not caring, marriage isn't about two equals trying to outachieve each other. It's about recognizing your strengths and weaknesses. Emma's strength is making our home beautiful. My strength is, well, everything else. He laughed. He actually laughed. And Richard Blackwell, that spineless bastard, laughed with him. A nervous, sycophantic laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. That's when something inside me broke. Or maybe it was something being freed. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember placing my napkin on the table. But I remember the sound of my chair scraping against the floor. I remember every eye at that table turning to me. Emma? Marcus's smile faltered. Honey, where are you? Do you know what's really funny about marriage, Marcus? My voice came out steady, clear, nothing like the apologetic whisper I'd used for years. It's how quickly a man can convince a woman that her dreams are less important than his comfort. His face paled. Emma, sit down. You're making a scene. Good. Let me make a scene. I looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. 7 years ago, I had a job offer from the Guggenheim Museum. Did you know that, Richard? A real position, not a little project. I turned it down because Marcus said his career had to come first, that we'd revisit it later. That later never came. This is neither the time nor the place. Marcus started to stand. When is the time, Marcus? When is the place? Certainly not in our home, where you barely acknowledge I exist unless you need something from me. Certainly not at your office parties, where you introduce me as just my wife, like I'm an accessory you picked up at Barney's. Diane Chen was openly staring now, a small smile playing at her lips. Patricia had her hand over her mouth. The men looked like they wanted to disappear. You want to talk about knowing your role? I continued, my voice rising. I know my role. I've played it perfectly for 7 years. The supportive wife, the pretty decoration, the woman who makes you look successful and stable and like you have your life together. But here's what you don't know, Marcus. I've been documenting everything. That got his attention. What? Every condescending comment, every dismissal of my interests. Every time you forgot to tell me about a work event until the last minute because you didn't actually want me there. Every financial decision you made without consulting me, even though New York is a common property state. I've been writing it all down, Marcus. Every single thing. I wasn't actually. Not in any official capacity. But the fear that flashed across his face told me everything I needed to know about his guilty conscience. Emma, you're being hysterical. No, Marcus, I'm being clear. Probably for the first time in our marriage. I picked up my clutch, my hands surprisingly steady. Enjoy your dinner. Enjoy your partners. Enjoy your corner office and your six-figure salary and your traditional marriage. Because as of right now, you don't have a wife anymore. I turned to Richard Blackwell, who was staring at his plate like it might offer him an escape route. Richard, I sincerely hope you treat your associates better than my soon-to-be ex-husband has treated me. Because if this is the kind of man who succeeds at your firm, I'd hate to see what your company culture actually looks like. Then I walked out of Cipriani's with my head held high, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to freedom. I made it to the corner before I started shaking. I made it to the subway platform before the tears came, but I didn't go back. I didn't apologize. I didn't shrink. For the first time in 7 years, I chose myself. Part 3. The Aftermath. The first night, I stayed at the Washington Square Hotel. It was all I could book on short notice, and I charged it to our joint credit card with a certain vindictive satisfaction. Let him see the expense. Let him wonder. I didn't sleep. I lay in that hotel bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from Marcus. Where are you? You humiliated me in front of my colleagues. We need to talk about this rationally. Emma, you're being childish. Come home. And finally, around 3 a.m, you've made your point. I'm sorry. Please come home. But it wasn't a real apology. It was the apology of a man who'd been inconvenienced, not one who'd had a revelation. I knew Marcus well enough to know the difference. I called my best friend, Sarah, at 7 a.m. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. Em, what's wrong? I left Marcus. Silence. Then, oh, thank God. I laughed through my tears. You're supposed to ask if I'm okay first. Are you okay? No. Yes. I don't know. Sarah, what did I just do? Something you should have done years ago, she said firmly. Where are you? I'm coming to get you. Sarah arrived an hour later with coffee, bagels, and a fierce determination in her eyes. She'd never liked Marcus, something she'd diplomatically kept to herself throughout my marriage. Now, sitting across from me in that hotel room, she didn't hold back. He's been gaslighting you for years, Emma, making you think you were the problem, making you small, making you grateful for crumbs of attention. She grabbed my hand. You did the right thing walking out. I don't have a job, Sarah. I don't have my own money. I haven't worked in 7 years. You have a master's degree from Columbia. You're brilliant. You're resourceful. You'll figure it out. She squeezed my fingers. And you can stay with me and Jake as long as you need. We have that guest room that's basically just storage right now. I can't impose. Emma, stop. You're not imposing. You're letting your friends help you. There's a difference. That afternoon, I went back to the brownstone while Marcus was at work. I packed 3 suitcases with my clothes, my books, my laptop, and the few personal items that actually meant something to me. The house felt like a museum of a life I no longer wanted. Beautiful, expensive, and completely empty of warmth. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter with a note. I want a divorce. My lawyer will contact you. I didn't have a lawyer yet. But I would. Part 4. Rebuilding the first month was hell. Pure, unfiltered hell. I cried. A lot. Not because I missed Marcus. I was shocked to realize I didn't. Not really. What I missed was the security, the routine, the identity of being someone's wife. 7 years of defining myself in relation to another person had left me unsure of who I was alone. I filed for divorce with a lawyer Sarah recommended, a fierce woman named Gloria Santos who took one look at my situation and said, "Oh, honey, we're going to make him pay." Marcus fought it. Of course he did. Not because he wanted me back, but because divorce was embarrassing. It was messy. It didn't fit the image he'd cultivated of the successful lawyer with the perfect life. He tried everything. First came the apologies, the promises to change, Then came the guilt trips. After everything I've provided for you, then came the threats. You'll get nothing. You haven't contributed anything to this marriage. That last one was a mistake on his part, because in New York, a spouse's contribution to a marriage isn't measured purely in dollars. And I had emails, texts, calendar entries proving how I'd supported his career at the expense of my own. Gloria was building a case that would ensure I walked away with enough to start over properly, but money was only part of the equation. I needed to figure out who Emma was without Marcus defining her. I started therapy, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, a kind woman with a no-nonsense approach that I desperately needed. In our first session, she asked me a question that shattered me. Emma, when was the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Not because it was expected, not because it was your role, just because it brought you joy? I couldn't answer. I sat there for 5 full minutes, searching my memory, and came up empty. Then that's where we'll start, she said gently. I started small. I went to museums again, alone, letting myself linger in front of paintings for as long as I wanted without someone sighing impatiently behind me. I took a pottery class at the local community center. I started reading the books on my list that I'd been too busy to get to for years, and slowly, very slowly, I started to remember who I was. But the real turning point came from an unexpected place. I was at the Brooklyn Museum on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, standing in front of a Judy Chicago installation, when I heard a voice behind me. Magnificent, isn't it? The way she reclaims traditionally feminine crafts and elevates them to fine art. I turned to find a woman about my age with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers, studying the piece with the same reverence I felt. Yes, I said, my voice rusty from disuse in public spaces. I wrote my thesis on feminist art of the 1970s. Chicago was a major focus. Her eyes lit up. Really? I'm Diana. I'm the assistant curator for the contemporary collection here. We talked for 2 hours. About art, about the museum, about the state of art education in public schools. It was the first real conversation I'd had in months that wasn't about my divorce, or my feelings, or what I was going to do with my life. As we were exchanging numbers, Diana wanted to continue the conversation over coffee. She said casually, "You know, we're actually looking for someone to help develop our new community outreach program. Education-focused, working with underserved communities to increase museum access. It's not curatorial, exactly, but would you be interested?" Would I be interested? I wanted to cry, to laugh, to hug this stranger who was offering me an actual opportunity. Yes, I said. God, yes. When can I apply? The job interview was scheduled for 2 weeks later. I prepared like my life depended on it, because in many ways, it did. I dusted off my resume, adding my volunteer work at the library, framing my time off as a period of community engagement and skill development. I reached out to my old professors from Columbia, asking for recommendations. I researched the museum's current programs, identifying gaps I could fill. The night before the interview, I couldn't sleep. Doubt crept in like an old friend. What if I'd been out of the game too long? What if they could see through me? See that I was just a housewife trying to pretend she was still relevant? But then I remembered Marcus's face at that dinner. The condescension. The cruelty. The absolute certainty that I was less than him. I remembered the feeling of walking out of that restaurant, and I thought, I will never be small again. The interview went better than I dared hope. The director of education, a sharp woman named Keisha Williams, reviewed my thesis, asked insightful questions about my approach to adult education, and seemed genuinely impressed by my ideas for the outreach program. You've clearly thought deeply about accessibility and cultural barriers to museum engagement, she said, nodding as I outlined a program that would partner with community organizations to bring museum experiences directly to neighborhoods that rarely visited. I've lived in Brooklyn for years, I said, and I've seen how the museum can feel like this intimidating temple of culture that's not for everyone. But art should be for everyone. Education should be for everyone. I want to break down those walls. 2 days later, Diana called me. Emma, you got it. The board loved you. When can you start? I cried. Right there on Sarah's couch, I sobbed like a child. Not because of the salary, though it was decent, enough to afford my own small apartment, but because someone had seen value in me again. Professional value, intellectual value, me value, not wife value. Okay, we need to celebrate, Sarah declared, handing me a box of tissues. And then we need to get you some actual work clothes, because I love you, but you can't wear yoga pants to a museum job. Part 5. Rising. My first day at the Brooklyn Museum felt like my first day of graduate school, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I had an actual office, small but mine, with a window overlooking the sculpture garden. I had business cards with my name and title, Emma Hartwell, Community Outreach Coordinator. I'd reclaimed my maiden name in the divorce proceedings. Marcus had been weirdly offended by this, as if my name had been his property too. The work was harder than I expected. Developing a community program from scratch meant endless meetings, budget proposals, partnership negotiations with community centers and schools, but it was also more fulfilling than anything I'd done in years. My first program launched 3 months after I started. We called it Museum Without Walls, and the concept was simple. Bring museum educators and collections directly to communities. Host pop-up exhibitions in community centers, libraries, and even parks. The response was overwhelming. Kids who'd never stepped foot in a museum were seeing original artworks, asking questions, creating their own pieces inspired by what they'd learned. Adults were engaging with art history in ways that felt relevant to their lives. I was making a difference. Real, tangible difference. And people were noticing. 6 months into my job, I was invited to speak on a panel about arts education and community engagement at a conference in Philadelphia. Me, speaking. On a panel. Like an actual expert. I almost said no. The imposter syndrome was real and vicious. Who was I to be speaking to other professionals? I'd only been back in the field for half a year. But Dr. Rodriguez, my therapist, called bullshit on that thinking. Emma, you have a master's degree from Columbia. You've successfully launched a program that's already being used as a model by other institutions. You've spent years volunteering in education. You're not an imposter. You're qualified. Stop letting Marcus's voice in your head tell you otherwise. She was right. So I went. And I was terrified. And I was also kind of brilliant. The panel went well enough that afterward, 2 different museum directors approached me about consulting opportunities. One of them was from the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA. One of the most prestigious institutions in the world wanted my expertise. I felt like I was in a dream. Meanwhile, the divorce was grinding toward its conclusion. Marcus had finally accepted that I wasn't coming back, but he was determined to make the process as painful as possible. He contested every asset, questioned every expense, dragged his feet on every piece of paperwork. Gloria, my lawyer, was unfazed. This is what men like him do when they lose control, she explained over coffee one afternoon. They can't win you back, so they punish you for leaving. But we have a strong case, Emma. The prenup he insisted on is actually in your favor, given how one-sided the marriage became. We'll get you what you deserve. The settlement, when it finally came through, was more generous than I expected. The brownstone would be sold and the proceeds split. I'd get a portion of his retirement accounts, And most importantly, I'd get alimony for 5 years, enough to ensure I could continue building my career without financial panic. "He's going to regret underestimating you," Gloria said as I signed the final papers. "Mark my words." I'd been too focused on my own journey to think much about Marcus's life post-separation. I'd blocked him on social media, avoided places I might run into him, focused entirely on moving forward. But word had a way of getting back to me anyway. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that the dinner at Cipriani's had not gone unnoticed. Richard Blackwell's wife, Diane, had apparently been quite vocal about Marcus's treatment of me. And in the world of big law, where appearances and reputation mattered enormously, being known as the guy who publicly humiliated his wife was not a good look. Marcus's track to senior partner had stalled, not stopped, but definitely slowed. I'd be lying if I said that didn't bring me a small amount of satisfaction. Part 6. Transformation. A year after I walked out of Cipriani's, I was barely recognizable, and I mean that in the best possible way. I'd moved into a small but charming apartment in Park Slope, all exposed brick and hardwood floors and windows that let in actual sunlight. It was a fraction of the size of the brownstone, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every piece of art on the walls, every book on the shelves. I'd chosen them. Not we. Me. My work at the museum had expanded beyond my original role. I was now leading a team of 5, developing programs not just in Brooklyn, but partnering with museums across the city. My Museum Without Walls initiative had been featured in the New York Times, a full-page spread with photos and everything. The article had called it "A Revolutionary Approach to Democratizing Art Access." I'd framed that article, not because I was vain, but because every time I looked at it, I remembered the woman who'd sat in that hotel room a year ago, terrified and uncertain. "Look how far you've come," I'd tell her. I'd also started dating again, which was terrifying in a completely different way. Nothing serious. A few dinners, a couple of second dates, one brief relationship with a kind but ultimately incompatible journalist. I was learning what I wanted, what I wouldn't tolerate, what made me happy versus what I thought should make me happy. Turned out there was a significant difference, but the real transformation wasn't external. It was internal. It was in the way I moved through the world now. Confident, certain, unapologetic. It was in the way I spoke up in meetings, contributed ideas, disagreed with colleagues when I thought they were wrong. It was in the way I'd stopped prefacing every statement with maybe, or I think, or sorry. But I'd found my voice again, and it was louder than I remembered. The encounter I'd been simultaneously dreading and anticipating happened on a Friday evening in September. I was at a gallery opening in Chelsea, a former Columbia classmate's first solo show. The space was packed with the art world crowd, critics, collectors, other artists, people who looked important, holding glasses of cheap wine. I was deep in conversation with a gallerist who was interested in partnering with the museum when I felt it. That prickling awareness that someone was watching me. I turned, and there he was. Marcus. Looking older somehow, tired around the eyes, his hair showing more gray than I remembered. And next to him, a woman. Younger than me, blonde like me, wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly rent. His date, or girlfriend, or maybe already the next wife. Our eyes met across the gallery. I saw the moment he recognized me, the widening of his eyes, the subtle straightening of his posture, the flash of something I couldn't quite read. Surprise? Regret? Anger? He said something to his date and started walking toward me. The old Emma would have panicked, would have made an excuse and fled, would have done anything to avoid the confrontation. The new Emma stood her ground. "Emma," he said as he reached me, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Why not?" I work in the art world. This is literally my professional sphere. I kept my voice pleasant, neutral. Marcus. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. You look good. Different. I am different. Better, actually. That landed. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. I heard about your program at the museum, he said. The Times article. That's great, Emma, really. Thank you. An awkward silence stretched between us. The woman he'd been with was watching from across the room, uncertainty on her face. I wanted to say, Marcus started, then stopped. I've been thinking a lot about that night at Cipriani's, about what I said. And I was drunk, and I was showing off for my colleagues, and He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from 1,000 arguments. I'm sorry. For that night. For a lot of things. It was the apology I'd wanted a year ago, but standing there, looking at this man I'd once loved, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. But Marcus, that night wasn't the problem. That night was just the moment when I finally saw clearly what our marriage had become. What you'd turned me into. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you asked me about my dreams? My goals? What I wanted from life beyond supporting yours? He didn't have an answer. I'm not angry anymore, I continued, and realized with surprise that it was true. I'm actually grateful. You gave me the push I needed to reclaim my life, so thank you for that night. Thank you for showing me exactly who you were. I saw the flash of pain cross his face, quickly masked. Good. Let him feel a fraction of what I'd felt for 7 years. I hope you treat her better, I said, nodding toward his date. I really do. Everyone deserves a partner who sees them as an equal. I turned to walk away, then paused. One more thing needed to be said. By the way, I'm consulting for MoMA now, developing their national outreach strategy, so I'll probably be at a lot more events like this, just so you know. And I walked away, leaving him standing there with the weight of his mistakes. Part 7. Success. The MoMA consulting gig turned into something much bigger. They were so impressed with my work that 6 months later, they offered me a full-time position as the Director of Public Programs. It came with a substantial salary increase, a real office with my name on the door, and the kind of professional validation I'd only dreamed about in graduate school. I accepted immediately. My life became a whirlwind of conferences, strategic planning sessions, budget meetings, and the actual creative work of developing programs that would bring art to hundreds of thousands of people who might never have stepped foot in a museum otherwise. I traveled to other cities to present my model. I was interviewed for podcasts and articles about innovation in arts education. I joined boards and committees. I mentored younger women trying to break into museum work. I became, quite without planning it, exactly the kind of person Marcus had once convinced me I could never be. The vindication, when it came, was sweeter than I'd imagined. I was speaking at a gala fundraiser for the museum, a fancy affair at the Plaza Hotel, the kind of event where people wore their most expensive jewelry and wrote 6-figure checks for charity. I'd been asked to give a short speech about the importance of accessible arts education. I stood at the podium in a stunning red gown, custom-made by a designer friend, a gift for my 40th birthday. Yes, 8 years had passed since that night at Cipriani's. Looking out at a ballroom full of New York's art world elite. And in the back corner, looking smaller than I remembered, was Marcus. He'd aged more than I had, I noticed with some satisfaction. His hairline had receded. He looked stiff in his tuxedo, uncomfortable in this world that was now mine. I didn't let his presence throw me. I gave my speech with passion and confidence, talking about how art could transform communities, how education was the bridge between museums and the people they should serve, how we had a responsibility to make culture accessible to everyone, not just those who could afford it. The applause was thunderous. People stood. A few wiped tears from their eyes. After the speech, I was swarmed with people wanting to talk to me, congratulate me, discuss partnerships and ideas. I was in my element, thriving in a way I never had as Marcus's wife. He approached as the crowd was finally thinning. Emma, that was incredible. I turned, surprised to see him. Marcus, I didn't realize you'd be here. I'm on the host committee. The firm buys a table every year. He looked uncomfortable. I had no idea you'd be speaking. Why would you? We haven't spoken in, 6 years? 7, he corrected automatically. Then, you've done remarkably well for yourself. Yes, I have. He winced at my directness. The old Emma would have softened it, made it less pointed. The new Emma didn't. I think about that night sometimes, he said quietly. At Cipriani's, what I said, how things ended. Do you? I was wrong, Emma, about so many things. I see that now. I studied him, this man who'd once held so much power over my sense of self. He looked smaller now, diminished. Not physically, just in the space he took up in my psyche. You were wrong, I agreed, but you were also the catalyst for the best thing that ever happened to me. Leaving you forced me to figure out who I was without you defining me. So in a way, I should thank you. That's generous of you. It's not generosity. It's honesty. I glanced at my watch. I should get back to my colleagues. It was interesting seeing you, Marcus. I started to walk away, then paused. There was one more thing I wanted him to know. By the way, the brownstone, I saw it sold last year. The buyers did a beautiful renovation. I'm glad it went to someone who will actually live in it, make it a home instead of a showpiece. His face flushed. I knew from Sarah, who still kept tabs on these things, that he'd had to sell the brownstone to cover some bad investments. He was living in a condo now. Nice, but nowhere near as impressive. Emma. Goodbye, Marcus. And I walked away into my life, leaving him behind in every sense of the word. Part 8. The Life I Built. 8 years after that night at Cipriani's, my life looked nothing like what Marcus had imagined for me, and everything like what I'd once dreamed for myself. I'd published my book on Artemisia Gentileschi, the one I'd started in graduate school and abandoned during my marriage. It had been well received in academic circles and even made a few mainstream bestseller lists. I was working on my second book now, a broader look at women artists who'd been erased from art history. I'd been promoted to Vice President of Education and Public Programs at MoMA, one of the youngest people to ever hold such a senior position at the museum. My programs had been adopted by museums across the country. I'd been profiled in Art Forum, The Wall Street Journal, and Vanity Fair. I'd given a TED Talk about democratizing access to culture that had over 5 million views. I owned my own apartment now, a beautiful 2-bedroom in the West Village, with a home office where I wrote, and a small balcony where I drank coffee every morning. I'd decorated it exactly how I wanted. Bold colors, eclectic art, comfortable furniture that prioritized function over Instagram aesthetics. I'd traveled extensively for work and pleasure. Rome, Paris, Tokyo, Mexico City. I'd stood in front of masterpieces in the Uffizi and the Louvre and the Prado, letting myself feel the full weight of being exactly where I was supposed to be. And I'd found love again. Not the desperate, all-consuming need you to validate me love of my 20s, but something steadier, deeper, more reciprocal. Daniel was an architect, thoughtful and creative and secure enough in himself that he celebrated my success instead of feeling threatened by it. We'd been together for 3 years, taking our time, both of us having learned from failed marriages that some things shouldn't be rushed. "You're glowing," Sarah told me over brunch one Sunday. We'd maintained our friendship through everything: my divorce, her own career changes, the birth of her 2 kids, all of life's ups and downs. "Seriously, Emma, you look happier than I've ever seen you." "I am happy," I said, and meant it. Is that weird? To just be genuinely, deeply happy? It's not weird. It's what you deserve. It's what you always deserved. The final encounter with Marcus happened at the most unlikely place, Columbia's Alumni Weekend. I'd been invited to speak on a panel about non-traditional career paths for humanities graduates. Marcus, as a major donor to the law school, was there for some donor recognition ceremony. We crossed paths in the lobby of the faculty building where I'd once taken classes, where we'd once studied together, where a different version of both of us had existed. "Emma Hartwell," he said, and there was something in his voice, acknowledgement, maybe, or resignation. Or should I say, Dr. Hartwell now? I'd earned my PhD part-time over the last 5 years, a goal I'd set for myself after the divorce. "The degree hasn't changed my name," I said lightly. "But yes, technically." "I heard you speak on the panel. You were excellent. As always." "Thank you." We stood there for a moment, 2 people who'd once promised forever, now virtual strangers. "I saw your engagement announcement in the Times," he said finally. "Congratulations." Daniel had proposed 3 months ago, on a weekend trip to the Berkshires. It had been perfect. Simple, heartfelt, a proposal that was about us rather than about the performance. "Thank you," I said again. "I'm very happy." "Good. You deserve that." It was the most generous thing he'd ever said to me. Maybe time and distance had given him perspective. Maybe his own romantic failures. I'd heard through the grapevine that his second marriage had also ended in divorce, had humbled him. Maybe he'd finally grown up. "You know," he said, looking at me with something like wonder, "I really did believe I was right. About our marriage, about your role, about what was best for us. I genuinely thought I was being practical, that I was protecting our future." "I know you did. That's what made it so insidious. If I could go back—" "You can't," I interrupted gently. "None of us can. We can only move forward. And I hope you're doing that, Marcus. I hope you've learned from your mistakes. I hope you're becoming a better person." "I'm trying to be." "For what it's worth." "Then that's good. We all deserve the chance to grow." He nodded, accepting the grace I was offering him. "For what it's worth, Emma, I'm proud of you, of what you've accomplished. I was a fool to ever make you feel small." "Yes," I said simply. "You were." We parted ways then, for what I suspected would be the last time. As I watched him walk away, I felt something release in my chest. The last remaining thread of bitterness, of anger, of attachment to who I'd been when I was with him. That night, I went home to Daniel. We cooked dinner together in our kitchen, dancing to old jazz records, laughing at nothing in particular. We talked about the wedding we were planning, small, intimate, focused on the commitment rather than the spectacle. We talked about the future, the house we wanted to buy, the possibility of kids, the books we still wanted to write, the places we still wanted to see. And I thought about that woman who'd walked out of Cipriani's 8 years ago, heartbroken and terrified and unsure of everything except that she couldn't stay in that marriage for one more second. I wished I could go back and tell her, "You're going to be okay. Better than okay. You're going to build a life that exceeds your wildest dreams. You're going to become someone you're proud of. You're going to be happy, really, truly, deeply happy. You're going to be free. Epilogue. 10 years after that night at Cipriani's, I was back at that same restaurant for an entirely different occasion. The Museum of Modern Art was hosting a dinner honoring the recipients of their new fellowship program, a program I'd created to support emerging museum professionals from underrepresented communities. I sat at the head table between the museum's director and a major philanthropist who'd funded the fellowships. My husband Daniel was next to me, handsome in his tuxedo, his hand resting casually on my knee under the table, a reminder that I was loved, supported, celebrated. Across the room, at a table in the back, sat Marcus with his third wife. Our eyes met briefly, and he raised his glass to me, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. I smiled and turned back to my conversation, because here's what I'd learned in those 10 years. The best revenge isn't about making someone regret losing you. It's about building a life so authentic, so fulfilling, so completely and utterly yours that you forget to care whether they regret it or not. I'd walked away from that dinner a decade ago with nothing but my dignity and my determination. I'd rebuilt myself from the ground up, discovering strengths I didn't know I had, pursuing dreams I'd almost let die, becoming the woman I was always meant to be. And if Marcus envied that life, if he lay awake at night thinking about what he'd lost, what he'd thrown away through his own cruelty and short-sightedness, well, that was his burden to carry, not mine. I'd moved on. I'd moved up. I'd moved forward into a life I'd created for myself, defined by my choices, fueled by my passions, surrounded by people who saw my worth. That night at Cipriani's hadn't destroyed me. It had freed me. And I would be forever grateful for the courage I'd found in that moment, the courage to stand up, walk away, and choose myself. Because sometimes, the best thing you can do is leave behind the life you thought you wanted and build the one you deserve. Emma Hartwell is currently the Vice President of Education and Public Programs at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She lives in the West Village with her husband Daniel and their rescue dog, Georgia. Her second book, Erased: Women Artists Who Changed History, will be published next spring. She hasn't been back to Cipriani's since that night, and she doesn't plan to. Some places belong to the past, and she's too busy building her future to look back. The end.